When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb Flashenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Deb Flashenberg, and I'm your host of Yoga Birth Babies. And today we're going to take a deep dive into the topic of VBACs, Vaginal Birth After Cesareans. So we're going to talk about the most common reasons for a cesarean, as well as the risks and benefits of a VBAC. We're also going to talk about what might risk somebody out of trying a VBAC, as well as the risks of a repeat cesarean, and really understanding the questions to ask your care provider to see if they're really VBAC friendly and supportive. So to have this conversation, I have Meagan Heaton. She is the co-founder of VBAC Links, which was established in 2018. Although she always felt called to the baby world, she really found her love for birth in 2014 after her second C-section. Through these two birth experiences, her love and passion grew around VBAC. She wanted to help people feel supported and loved. She had 2 C-sections and then went on to have a VBA-2C, VBAC after 2 cesareans, and has now supported over 350 families through their birthing journey as a labor support doula. I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation. And Meagan also shares about her VBAC stories. I always think birth stories are really important and supportive. So I'm excited for you to hear that. Before we get into my conversation with Meagan, just a reminder, you can find all of the updates about Prenatal Yoga Center, our classes, online, in studio, our workshops, even our prenatal yoga teacher training. All of that is on our website. It's a really dense website. We've got a ton of blogs and over 400 podcast episodes all housed there. So take some time, dive in, find out all the good things that we have going on at PYC at prenatalyogacenter.com. And one final thing, when you have a moment, I would really appreciate if you can leave a rating and review for the podcast. It's just another way of helping people connect to us and join our online community. And as always, thank you for being part of our online community. Okay, we're going to take a super quick break, and when we come back, please enjoy my conversation with Meagan.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate pina colada and Thai-iced coffee flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
Hi, Meagan. How are you?
I am so great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm really excited to talk about VBACs because I've had many students come into class talking about they want a VBAC. They ask me a question, they ask my opinion about it. So I think it's a really important topic, and I'm really glad that you're here to share all about that. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me. I think that there's a lot of people out there that learn about VBAC, sometimes even late in pregnancy, and just don't know where to go or what to do or all the things.
Even what it is, or should they even consider it, all that good stuff.
Yes.
So I'd love to learn a little bit more about you.
And how did you become so passionate about supporting and advocating for VBACs? And I guess maybe we should also say what VBAC stands for, because I realize we've thrown that word out probably already 10, 15 times in like the 2 minutes we've been recording.
Right. Yes. So VBAC, which is actually right now VBAC. A lot of people think VBACK, like back, right? But it's actually VBAC, and that stands for Vaginal Birth After Cesarean. And then to like not get too complicated, but to also know that like if you start Googling that and then you start seeing a whole bunch of other things, there's a lot of other little acronyms for that, like HBAC, HBAC, which is home birth, right? Or 2 VBAC, which is 2 VBACs after cesarean, and the list goes on and on. So if you start Googling that and then see a whole bunch of other ones, just know you're in the right place. There's just different meanings for different births after cesarean.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. So yeah, tell me a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I got married young and pregnant young and was really excited to be pregnant. I just could not wait to be a mom. I had always felt like that was my journey of life, is to be a mom. And so I got pregnant and downloaded an app because that was what we did back then. And that's really all I did. I just downloaded the app and got an idea of what size my baby was and what pregnancy symptoms I may.
Your baby's the size of a beet. Your baby's the size of an avocado. Your baby's the size of a watermelon. Okay, yeah, I had that too. Yeah.
Yeah, so this week, this is the size of your baby. These are the symptoms you may or may not be experiencing, kind of thing, right? And I kind of just said, cool, like I'm learning. And I didn't really extend my knowledge past that, which was a big regret. But at the same time, I'm not going to knock myself for it too much because it is what led me to where I am today. So I did that and ended up having my baby or my water break. And I was really excited and everyone said, rush to the hospital. So I did. And my body was taking its sweet old time. And that was something that I didn't really know that was normal, but was being told it wasn't normal during the time. And 12 hours later at 3 centimeters, I was told that my pelvis was too small and that my body just didn't know how to do it and was deemed failure to progress, which we'll go over in a second.
That's the worst name. I mean, talk about already feeling overwhelmed to be like, you're a failure to progress.
Failure to progress. Yeah, I hated that word. I still hate it today.
At 3 centimeters. They did it at 3 centimeters. I thought ACOG, I don't know when you had your baby, but I thought ACOG said we really should not use that. I mean, again, horrible to use that until at least 6 centimeters when you turn the corner into active labor. So was this before kind of that proclamation? Okay.
So this was when it was 4 centimeters. However, there was still change. So back then, and it has changed to 6 centimeters, but back then it was like 4 centimeters dilated, water had broken for an X amount of time, and no change had been had. But change was happening for me. My cervix was thinning, so I was becoming more effaced and things like that. But because that number 3 didn't change, even though it really... It was changing. It just wasn't changing fast enough for them, I guess. I was told failure to progress. Your body can't do this, doesn't know how to do it, and your pelvis is likely too small to get a baby out anyway. So I was wheeled down to the OR and really was not excited about it, but also didn't know any better to ask questions or do anything. I just knew that I was going to have a baby soon. And that is what I did. I had my first C-section, and I remember just being really out of it after like falling asleep, waking up, seeing new people holding my baby. It was just emotional, you know? Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, cool. I guess this is my fate. And I got pregnant again later on and started learning about a VBAC. And I was like, oh, I really want to do that. I don't want to do that C-section thing again. And so I started researching, doing myself better service and really educating myself. Learned about a doula late in pregnancy, but my husband was not super on board. He didn't feel comfortable with it, was worried about spending money, was worried about a new person that he didn't know in the room. Just unfortunately, he just didn't understand. And I tried to fight him, but didn't. And my water broke again. So I had prom with all three of my babies, which is premature rupture of membranes, meaning my body's water break, like my waters break, but labor kind of takes its time to happen. So this time I didn't run to the hospital. I stayed and was laboring and did start contracting. But after a lot of hours and a lot of pressure from family and my husband, I ended up walking into the hospital and was kind of supported. I was really supported by my nurse at first because she was actually a doula. But then after that, it was kind of like, hey, you need to wake up. Like, this isn't going to happen. And
so you had a doctor that was cool with the VBAC.
I mean, he said, this is where a lot of my learning then, moving forward has grown. He said, yes. I said, hey, do you support VBAC? He said, yes. I said, cool. I said, so can I have that? He said, sure. Right. Like it was like, yes, and sure, and fine. So I thought he was VBAC supportive, but when it came down to it, he wasn't. He wasn't supportive. He refused to give me Pitocin, even though it's not contraindicated. Like, I can totally have Pitocin with VBAC. And yeah, he refused anything and just was pretty much bullying us into a repeat cesarean, which was unfortunate because my husband too was like, just do what he says. Like, he pulled out the, you're putting your baby's life at risk. And it's just like, oh, so frustrating because I didn't believe that, but I didn't feel like I had any other choice. So I ended up walking down for a repeat C-section the second time.
How far along did you get? Like, where was baby stationed, effacement, dilation? Or did you not even get to that point? Like, they weren't even checking you?
Yeah, I was like 1 centimeter high, thick. Like, I was having back labor, which, my baby was likely posterior. I wasn't even given the opportunity to labor and go. It was just like, you need to do this. You're making a mistake if you don't. And so I did. And I did have a very healing experience. I told my husband, hey, if I have to have a repeat cesarean, I want to be involved this time. I don't want to be hearing the vacation that the providers are so sad that they're back from, and it's snowing and, just very impersonal. So I did have a more personal experience where I got to watch in a mirror, which I know is not everyone's, favorite thing or desire, but I really liked it. I really felt that I was being, really a part of my birth, and they were talking to me and they were playing music, and it was a healing experience, even though it was one that I didn't want. But it was after that birth, I was in the post-op room, dark, swollen, feeding a baby, and I was Googling how to become a doula, and all of my adrenaline in my body just started like flowing at like 100 miles an hour. And I was like shaky and excited and was like, this is what I want to do. I want to become a doula. I want people to help, I want to help people know their options, whether or not they choose a cesarean in the future or not. Just help them know their options, because I didn't, and I was backed into a corner. And so that is where my journey of birth doula began. And then it only grew further into going on and having a VBA-2C. So there's another one for you guys, Vaginal Birth After Cesarean.
Oh, I have so many questions on that. Okay. So let's go further. I want to dig into who the provider was for that, as well as when you and what inspired VBAC links. So before we get to that, VBAC links. So I'm just curious, who did you have as your provider for vaginal birth after 2 cesareans?
Hey, so I had 2 providers. So I started with a hospital VBAC-supportive provider at the time here in Utah. He was like the VBAC doctor. If you want a VBAC, you go to this doc. And I interviewed him actually before I was pregnant. I interviewed a lot of people, but he was like my guy. I was like, yeah, this is it. So I became pregnant and chose him as my provider. And then at 24 weeks, I decided to switch just after attending an out-of-hospital birth with a midwife as a doula. And this midwife blew me away, and everything inside said, just talk to her. And so I did. I scheduled a visit to talk to her, and I decided to transfer care with the backup plan of my original provider in the event that I needed more support.
What was it about her that blew you away?
Her trust in the body's ability to give birth. I can't explain it to you necessarily, but it was it was actually kind of hard because I was feeling guilty because I was attending this birth as a doula to support someone, but I couldn't get out of my head in this moment watching this midwife support her, thinking, I want this. So it was like the weirdest battle inside my head where finally I had to just be like, can I come talk to you after the birth? And she's like, yeah. So I had to like unplug and throw that to the side. But really it was just the absolute trust in the mom. The mom was like, I need to change positions. And she was like, okay. And she changed positions. Or she was like, I want you to check my baby's heart rate. And she's like, okay, I can do that. But she put this like utter peace out inside of this room that I just was like, this is what I want. Because I had never experienced that before. I had only experienced, you can't do it. You're a failure. Your body's not good enough. Just doubt. Just so much full of doubt. And this provider just provided peace and confidence, truly. And I just was in awe over it.
That sounds really beautiful. And I love that you had that other care provider ready should things need, because that's what we always need for home births, is to have that backup. At least I think so. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
So what a beautiful story. And it sounds like you got your VBAC.
I did. I started out with prom, just like my other babies, and had a 42-hour-long labor. So my body just likes to take its time. But it was the most beautiful experience. I pulled my son out myself up onto my chest and just absolutely bawled my eyes out and screamed, I did it, you guys, I did it, and was just overwhelmed with joy with the support that I had surrounding me. And yeah, it was a big move and shift in me as a person at that time. Not even just as a doula, like everything shifted in the positive direction. And that's kind of where the VBAC link started after that.
So talk a little bit about what that is.
Yeah. So my old partner, Julie Frankham, who I absolutely love and adore, so shout out to her. She kind of had this idea of starting a company to raise awareness for VBAC and ended up calling me. And we ended up partnering and deciding that we wanted to do the course and a podcast and all the things because there was such a big need. We had felt that during our own journey. She was also a VBAC mom and decided that people needed to have more. And so we wanted to create that one-stop place, where they could find healing stories of all different types of births and facts and the course and resources and all the things. And so that is really where the VBAC link was born.
Oh, that's okay. I'll make sure we have obviously the link to your website in our show notes. So let's jump to common reasons someone may have a cesarean. So I guess failure to progress is up there, but what other reasons might someone be facing? Just so I think when people understand the reasons, they can understand how to have a conversation about this with their care provider.
Yeah. And see, these reasons that we're going to go over, they are reasons why people are being told that cesareans are needed, but they're not all really true. And that's the tricky part. So I really, like you said, I encourage everyone to take it to their provider and have true conversations with them. Failure to progress, which we know is often stemmed from failure to wait or premature induction or too much too fast. We also have big baby. So this is one that I personally am seeing so much within the VBAC link and my own personal doula company. We are seeing providers doubting the ability to get a baby out in fear that they are too big, which is a fear. Like shoulder dystocia is a thing, but yeah, we're being told like your baby's too big. You can't even try for a vaginal birth. So big baby, breech. So fetal position, breech has gone away from being done as much anymore. And so breech would be a reason that someone could maybe have a C-section. Fetal distress, maybe labor's going, whether or not it's an induction or spontaneous, and baby's not doing well and not recovering well. And, it's needed to get the baby out. So fetal distress. Or maybe some placental issues. We've got placenta accreta and previa and things like that where the placenta has issues or it's covering the cervix or is embedded in to the scar, and it is just not safe to have a vaginal birth. So that's one that's like very warranted. And then there's tons of other reasons, but those are kind of the top.
So what are some ways that someone can discuss this ahead of time? Like I know in New York City, I don't know who is delivering breech anymore. It's just, if there's not a care provider, then they are kind of unfortunately out of luck. I know that some would be, if it's a twin situation, sometimes they'll do baby A if baby A is head down, hope baby B flips on its way down or grab the feet. So, but singletons, I'm not sure in my area who does breech. That then becomes, I guess, medically justified if you don't have someone that's going to do it. But what would you say to somebody that ahead of time, their care provider is saying, baby's big? How would you advocate for a conversation about that?
Yeah. So baby's big. What does that mean? Right? What does baby big mean? Because we know that ultrasounds they're notorious for being off. So you can have a baby that's measuring 8 pounds and being told that they should have a C-section when that baby could be 7 pounds, 6 pounds, maybe 9 pounds, but even 9 pounds we see come out vaginally all the time. So I think that the biggest thing is to have that conversation of what does big mean and what are the risks and what's the evidence showing that my baby is truly going to be this size and that it's like a C-section's warranted because of it? What are the pros and cons of me not having a C-section and going for a vaginal birth? What's the likelihood, right? So really just diving in and having that conversation with the provider. And if your provider is able to say, okay, based off of this is what we know. These are the accuracies of the ultrasound. We know that they can vary plus or minus 1 to 2 pounds. Here's the chance of, shoulder dystocia and the risks that come with shoulder dystocia, and break it down. And then my ideal provider would be like, what feels best for you? What are you comfortable with? Right? Like asking the mom versus like, this is what we have to do because you grew a baby that's too big. When most of the time they're not too big. We just have things like water or breaking water too early and babies are coming down in a wonky position, or we're sticking moms in a certain spot that's not working well with their pelvis shape and their baby's head, or their baby is coming down in asynclitic or transverse looking way. And that's what's actually impacting the baby coming out versus the baby just being on the larger end.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk also about, I'm going to throw out this just for our listeners. If you're hearing someone saying baby, this is just my opinion, baby's too big and you still want a vaginal birth. And I think the next important thing to talk about is freedom of movement and freedom of birthing positions, because we know different positions are going to affect the pelvis. So if someone's saying like, baby's too big, well, maybe being flat on your back with your sacrum pushing into the pelvis, not ideal. So, because I've coached some of my students on this, like, oh, my doctor's saying my baby's big. And then the conversation is fantastic, good information. Thank you for sharing. So now we need to talk about ways to not just open the pelvis, but release some of the soft tissue. And I find that has been helpful for people because then they go in with some information instead of fear, like, okay, I got this. I'm going to make space for baby. So that's another one about talking about failure to progress. How would you coach someone? Because we don't know what's going to happen until they're in there. So if they know their care providers, like, oh, I'm worried about failure to progress, to try to map out, well, if we start to see labor dystocia, what are things we can do before saying, oh, baby's not coming out, failure to progress?
I mean, there's so much to dive into here. Like, I mean, even before labor, chiropractic care, becoming balanced and aligned. And that goes, big baby often goes with small pelvis. That's CPD. It's a diagnosis that a lot of people are being told they have to have C-section, right? And so big baby, small pelvis, but like you were saying, like, what can we do to like make our pelvis bigger? Like, that sounds weird, but it's actually a thing. Like, we can move and groove and create more space. And so, yeah, I feel like I even just lost track of exactly what you asked because I'm so focused on big baby.
I know, I get very excited about that.
Getting our pelvis and failure to progress, right?
Yeah,
and
failure to progress. So yeah, just kind of setting up a conversation ahead of time, saying, knowing that is, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the number one reason first-time parents have a C-section is because that tag failure to progress. So knowing that is a possibility, how can the expectant parent talk to the care provider ahead of time? So should that come up, they have a bit of a plan before just jumping into C-section.
Right. So, and this can change for first-time moms versus like third-time moms or people who've had C-sections. But failure to progress typically is something that happens when we are pushing our body to progress, or we're deciding that our body's a robot and needs to progress within a certain amount of time, hourly or whatever, and we're not letting it go. So if a provider is concerned about that, or maybe you're concerned about that, maybe your mom or your sister both had failure to progress and you're like, well, I'm a lot like them. Maybe could I have failure to progress? I think dissecting the reasons why failure to progress of the diagnosis was given. Like, actually dive in. So for my mom, she had failure to progress. She had 2 C-section, was told she had CPD. She would never get a baby out of her pelvis, similar to me. And as I was talking to my mom, I didn't have her op reports, unfortunately, but as I was talking to her, she was telling me kind of the situation of what was happening. And I was like, oh, wait, they broke your water at what station? And she was like, I swear it was like 3, but like they were telling me my baby was high. And I was like, okay, so like probably like a -3 station. So they broke my water as a baby when I was really, really, really high. And so I came down funky, which was not allowing the pressure of my head to get on the cervix correctly and dilate my mom with the contractions, right? And so if my head is wonky and I'm not putting pressure on the cervix correctly, and she's just sitting in an upright position, or a reclined position in the bed for 10 hours, then that's a thing. Like, how are we supposed to progress if our baby's not pressing on our cervix correctly? Does that make sense? And Absolutely. So there's things like that. So you can say like, hey, this happened to my mom. So one, I think you should find out why whoever you're worried about that had failure to progress had it, and see if it actually was failure to progress or failure to wait or pushing things, right? But then talk about that with your provider. Hey, so this is like weighing on my chest. In the event of my cervix stalling for whatever reason, at whatever centimeter, what can we do together as a team to help that progress? What do you see help? right? Like open that up to the provider. A lot of providers are like, I see Pitocin helping, or I see movement helping, or sometimes I see, if it's in early labor, you going home and relaxing and resting, and then you coming back and being in active labor, because sometimes it's a fight or flight moment for us as moms. We tense up, and if we're tense, we can't have our cervix melt away. So really have that conversation with your provider. Or if they're really concerned, like, oh, this baby's looking kind of big, I'm worried this baby might not come out. Okay, let's talk about that. Why are you so worried? What are things you can do? Have the conversation.
No, I love this. I think it's really important to have these conversations well ahead of time, have plans. All right, we're around 5 centimeters. Things have kind of stalled out. And then we can look at, all right, so like you said, what kind of movements, where might baby be in the pelvis? Emotionally, is something going on? What kind of hip opening or pelvis opening, and just hearing if the care provider is even open to that. Because like one thing you did say is a lot of them were like, let's keep going with PIT. But we know that if we just keep putting power, but the passenger is in a funky position, all the power in the world may not move that baby.
I know.
It drives me crazy. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, let's start to talk about what are some of the benefits of a VBAC. Okay, we'll be right back.
Good night, itchy eyes. Good night, sudden sneeze. Good night to your symptoms of allergies. Zysol is the allergy medicine you take before bed. It provides powerful relief while you rest your head. Not just all night, but all the next day. Zysol keeps working, keeping allergies at bay. And without those annoying symptoms disturbing your rest, you can wake up the next morning feeling your absolute best. Remember, be wise all. Take Zysol. At night.
Lowe's knows that free is just better. That's why MyLowe's Rewards is free to join. As a member, you earn points towards MyLowe's money on eligible purchases, get exclusive free gifts, and earn free shipping at Silver Key status, all on top of weekly member-only deals. Don't wait. Join MyLowe's Rewards for free today and start saving more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
Okay, we're back. So let's talk about the benefits of a VBAC, and then let's also, know the risks. So let's start with benefits, and then we'll jump into risks.
Okay, so I mean, the benefits of having a vaginal birth, to me, right off the bat, is that you're not having surgery. C-section is a major surgery, right? So benefit of having a vaginal birth is not having surgery. The benefits of having a vaginal birth is typically you have a quicker recovery, like a faster recovery, or not intense of a recovery. But although I will say that doesn't always mean that you won't have a hard recovery if you have a vaginal birth. But you're not increasing your chances of placenta previa and accreta for future births or fertility. Like a lot of people don't know that every time we have an incision in our uterus, we may be impacting our fertility for future births.
I did not know that. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's something to think about, right? We have less chance of hemorrhaging that way too. So there's a lot of pros, and it again, as we get talking into these, the pros and the cons, you have to weigh out and decide what's best for you, because someone else's pro might be your con. So definitely something to consider when going for vaginal birth. I mean, it really is the most natural way to give birth, right? Vaginally. So
that makes sense, because it's like when I talk to my students, are like, I don't know if I should do a birth center or a hospital or a home. And I always say, where do you feel most comfortable? Where do you have less fear? And for some people, that's home. For some people, it's a hospital. And like you said, for some people, the idea of surgery sounds very much like a con, but for someone else, it's like, So I like that you really put it out there for people to hear about this and sit and see what's comfortable for them. So let's talk about the risks. What are the risks?
Of VBAC?
Of VBAC, yes.
Okay, so uterine rupture is the number one risk that most people, as they're searching for VBAC, will learn. Uterine rupture is the biggest, scariest, most talked about problem with VBAC. And that word sounds very big and scary, and I understand why. We hear the word rupture, that's scary. Uterine rupture is typically something that happens where the incision opens up and we need to get a baby out quickly. The chances are really, really low, like 0.4 to 1%, and maybe slightly over 1%, depending on certain things, like maybe how many cesareans you've had or induction and things like that. But it's a real thing, and it can be life-threatening. And so when we are considering a VBAC, we need to know what that means. And so, yeah, uterine rupture is number one. Tearing, vaginal tearing, which can cause pelvic floor issues or incontinence, where you can't hold your bladder or things like that. And now these are just very basic vaginal risks. So that keep in mind of that. So uterine rupture, tearing, incontinence, shoulder dystocia, as we were mentioning earlier. Sometimes if a baby is too large or coming down in a wonky position, it can be hard, and that can cause a baby to have like a broken clavicle. And so that can be a con. And then still needing a repeat cesarean, going for a vaginal birth, and then knowing that you can still maybe have a C-section, which would mean you'd be recovering from 2 births. So those are some of the main risks that are talked about when it comes to VBAC. And then just a lot of prep and emotional work that needs to come into it. And some people don't want to do that, which is okay.
I had a student who did our teacher training, then actually recently did her birth story, and she had a VBAC. She really, really prepped emotionally for it, but it was one interesting thing. And I'm like, did you do any emotional prep for the possibility of having a cesarean? She's like, I didn't even want to let it into my atmosphere, into my environment. And I'm like, okay. And I'm really, really, really glad she had the VBAC, because she did not emotionally prep for the possibility of having a repeat cesarean, which totally her choice. I would advise people, again, just my opinion, you can tell me to shut up, of course, but I would advise to emotionally prep for that, because my thought process is, if you put a lot of love and support and effort into the VBAC, but you don't have it, that could also lead to some disappointment. So I like that you mentioned the emotional prep for a repeat cesarean. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. And I would, sorry to add to your comment. I would agree with you wholeheartedly, because I think I understand where she was coming from, where she's like, I don't even want that in my space. But in my opinion, we are doing ourselves a disservice by not preparing for the alternative birth. And I mean, we have people on the podcast that are like, we will not listen to the C-section stories, which again, totally their choice. But I think it's important to also learn how to have a healing cesarean and how to make your cesarean better. I mean, that's really our whole goal here at the VBAC Link, is to make birth after cesarean better, no matter what that looks like, but to not completely write that out of the option, because it can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So say someone's listening and they're like, yes, VBAC all the way. Is there anything that might risk somebody out of even trying for a VBAC?
Yeah, there are. I mean, a lot of the times it's health issues, right? Where someone has a health issue or the baby has a health issue. And truly the best way to get baby here is via cesarean. Maybe that it's putting too much stress on the baby, or maybe mom's platelets are too low, or that's usually a C-section issue too. But like preeclampsia, sometimes the blood pressure can be too high, and the stress of labor can increase that and put mom and things at risk for stroke. And so, health issues are really where it comes in. Or we've had moms that, like, there was a mom that fell off a horse and her pelvis truly was like bolted together where it could not move. And so she might not really be a great candidate for a VBAC, So yeah, I think the biggest thing is checking, making sure like you're okay, you're healthy, baby is healthy, everything's good. Having one C-section doesn't mean you are eliminated from trying for a VBAC. That's a big misconception. A lot of people think, oh, I've had one, I have to, have all C-sections. That's a good candidate.
What are your thoughts on, now I'm going to date myself a little bit here. So I had a doula client, oh gosh, this is probably like 15-ish years ago. And she was a little bit of an older parent. And so her first child she had when she lived back in Germany. So we're now talking, maybe like 20 something years ago. And then she was having her second child. And they did not have records of what the incision was like.
Yeah.
Again, this might have even been 25 years ago of her first, and then she had her second. So how is that even a thing anymore? Like that they're concerned? Like, are people even doing vertical or single layer in sutures? That was one of the really big concerns. I don't know if that's even a thing. Maybe, that's not even something that people consider anymore.
So it is still a thing. It's called a special scar. There's different types of scars. There's T's, there's J's, there's low vertical. So definitely something that is still a thing. And if you have a special scar, meaning you have anything other than a low transverse incision, then there is support out there. There are groups like Special Scar, Special Hope, and there are studies to still show that even if you have a special scar, that you might have like an increased chance of rupture, like 2% or less, but you still can be a candidate for VBAC. If you don't know what type of scar you have, say for this person who maybe doesn't have her records, you can discuss it with your provider and just go what feels best for you. Single versus double layer, there's toss up, there's back and forth, what's really better is double layer really better. There's evidence to show, it could be better. But even if you have a single layer, that doesn't mean you're disqualified for having a VBAC.
Thank you for answering that. Because I'm not an active doula anymore. And I just remember that one case because it was so unique. All right. So we talked about the risks of VBAC. We've talked about why someone might be risked out. But what are the risks of a repeat cesarean?
So the risk of repeat cesarean, there's lots there too, right? There's lots on both sides. So uterine rupture. Going back to that, a lot of people do not know this, that a repeat cesarean does not take you out of the risk of a uterine rupture. So it is smaller, but it's still there. So uterine rupture is still there. A lot of the times it's due to the pressure that is being placed on the abdomen while making the incision. So hemorrhage, 4% of moms who have a cesarean will have a more severe type of hemorrhage. And dense adhesions, this is one that I think needs to be talked about more. It's not something that I ever heard come out of my provider's mouth, but dense adhesions. So this is where there is scarring. So anytime, anywhere on our body, we're cut open, right? Or have surgery or anything like that, our body naturally starts healing and creating scar tissue and things like that. So dense adhesions with the C-section, you have a higher risk of having those with each baby, which can cause fertility issues, like we had mentioned, can cause weird things like back pain that people don't realize is related to their cesarean because their bladder issues, because their bladder has adhered to their uterus.
So is this where like the scar tissue mobilization comes in?
Yes, that can come in like
I was thinking like the fascia.
Externally. Yeah, externally, but then there's internally too. So because we've got our external that goes deep, but then our internal that impacts organs.
Right. So that's where we're getting like if someone does have another baby, the accreta, where the placenta is growing through the scar. And then where the bladder, like you said, could adhere. Okay, it's interesting. Okay.
It's very, very interesting. So like with a second C-section, like having a second C-section, your dense adhesions risk or a bit likelihood is about 24%. to 24.5. And for 3 C-sections, it raises to like 46%. So each baby, the likelihood of you getting those dense adhesions that do cause actual problems within bladder or pain or even like incontinence. So we talked about vaginal birth, right? Like incontinence there, like that can also still be a thing with a C-section. So yeah. And then because of that, like things like that placenta accreta, bladder or bowel injury. So sometimes in a cesarean, your bladder or bowels will be nicked. And that can cause issue. And then baby actually getting nicked in a C-section.
This is interesting. I had not heard about the dense adhesion. So interesting. Okay. So now someone might be like, yes, on board, want a VBAC. Let's talk about interviewing their care provider and questions to see how much are they kind of VBAC supportive, or are they like really in there doing everything they can to be VBAC friendly and supportive and helping that person get to the other side?
Oh, yes. This is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about because I have been through this. I had to interview 12 providers before I found my provider. So diving in to find who's truly supportive, it can be tricky. And I kind of mentioned it in my first part of my story where I just kind of asked yes or no questions. And I would advise not doing that. Open-ended questions it's so powerful to really find out how your provider feels. So questions like, hey, I've had a C-section. This is why I had the C-section. I would like to VBAC. What are your thoughts on it? Right? Just simple as that. Sounds weird, but really giving them the opportunity to
explain themselves.
Explain themselves and give you a feel. So Dr. Fox, who's in New York, actually, we've chatted with him a little bit, and he'll be like, you'll know right away if that provider is comfortable with a VBAC or not. If they are hemming and hawing and hesitating or like, yeah, I mean, we see them, it's fine, but, then you kind of know. So, and again, going into the situation with your heart open and your intuition on high, following your intuition. So things like that. Questions like, hey, okay, so last time I made it to 41 weeks. I'm just curious if I make it to 41 weeks this time and I'm a VBAC and I'm not dilated or nothing's really going, what protocols would you require? Or what do you not use for VBAC? Do you use Pitocin? What do we do there? Asking like flat out questions like, how do you help your clients, or usually they're patients? I say clients because I'm stuck in the doula world, but patients have a VBAC. What do you do as a provider to help your patients? Right. So these open-ended questions create opportunity to have conversation and build the relationship between the patient and the provider. And then that patient is going to be like, okay, this is totally my provider. And then they are good. Or it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't like those answers. And I also think it's really good to ask the pros and the cons on VBAC and repeat cesarean. Hey, I'm really undecided right now. What, between VBAC and C-section, like what are the risks and the pros and the cons? If you have a provider that says there's a million risks for VBAC and there's no risk for C-section, huge red flag. Huge.
Because any surgery, no matter what their kind of ethics behind it are, any surgery has risks. So if there's like make that blanket statement, well, there's no risks, that I totally agree. That should be a red flag.
Yeah, red flag there. Or, I love VBAC. It's great as long as it looks like this, blah, 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 blah. And they paint out what your VBAC should look like. Let me tell you right now, my VBAC is not going to look like Sally Joe's down the hall or Jane across the way. Like if there's anything that this podcast that I record tells me, it's that every story is different. There may be similarities, but we're all different. And so if a provider expects your birth to go exactly as so, and they're supportive only if it's XYZ, big red flag, probably not a supportive provider. Maybe tolerant in the way of hey, I'll tolerate this, I'll support this, but then they always have the if it's this.
This is important. This is great. So that when people go in, they have in the back of their mind things they need to hear the provider say to know that's the right person, or at least having an open discussion. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to start wrapping up. So we're going to take another quick break. And when we come back, what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents? We will be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
All right, so we are back. So I'm curious where you're going to get your inspiration for answering this question, because you're a doula, but a parent as well. So what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents?
Really, education. If we are not educated, we cannot make the best choice for ourselves. We could based off of information we're given, but it might not be for me, I made the best choice that I made for myself with the information I was given. But had I known so much more, I would have made a different choice. Does that make sense? So education is so powerful, you guys. If you know the risks, the pros, the cons, the evidence, if this happens and that happens, again, it opens the ability to have the conversation and you to be in the driver's seat. Even though in labor, I sometimes struggle to say that. In labor, sometimes we're not in the driver's seat, right? Sometimes our baby's doing its own thing and we're just following. But statistics show if we are able to be part of our birth and make decisions for ourselves, we will end up having a better experience and view on our birth. So education.
I love that, because there is actually a lot of evidence-based information about when someone has autonomy, no matter what their birth ends up in the end, if they had some say in the matter, it is often viewed as a more positive experience, even if it is vastly different from how they went in, if they were not just kind of pulled along. So that is a great one. Education. Full-heartedly support that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, where can people find your work?
So you can really find us almost anywhere. The VBAClink.com is where our website is, and it's VBAC again. And you can find our blog, our podcast. We actually have a doula directory for VBAC certified doulas all over the world, both in and outside of the US, who are looking to help serve people and help advocate for them and help educate them along their way. We also have resources like providers. So, hey, if you're a provider listening and you're really VBAC supportive, if you're breech supportive, if you're vaginal birth after multiple cesareans supportive, please reach out and let us know. We love to add to that registry. Or if you're listening and you're like, oh my gosh, I have a provider I would suggest, please email us, because we want to help people find supportive providers all over the world, because we know that that's one of the biggest tasks when it comes to finding support.
Oh, I love that you have that. I absolutely agree. I've had so many students be like, well, I want this, but now who does it? And I have a list for New York, but it's always so important for people to have this kind of vetted people out there. So thank you for that. And thank you for this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor. And your community is amazing. And as always, if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to us.
Thank you.
This has been an episode of Yoga Birth Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.
In a world where single moms face countless challenges, the Single Mom Podcast offers a space of support and empowerment. Each episode offers stories of triumph, practical strategies, and heartfelt support to those on the journey of solo parenting. With a touch of humor and a wealth of inspiration, this podcast invites single moms everywhere to join a community that understands and uplifts. Discover the power of shared experiences and the strength of single mothers, because together they are truly unstoppable.